statistics. It is an honor to invite Bill to the podium.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you to the Danish government, I should say the Danish presidency, for the invitation, and a special thanks to my good friend Jorn Albild Andersen for inviting me here today. Jorn and I have known each other for many years. We met when I was chairman of the FCC and he was running the Telecom Regulatory Authority here in Denmark. And I got to know him through a series of discussion forums that he held where he brought interesting people like today to come together and talk about issues. And he was, back then in the late 90s, one of the most well-respected policymakers and thinkers in this area, and I think he's even more so today. So Jorn, thank you for inviting me here today. Well, I had prepared to throw a lot of statistics at you today about the benefits of the single digital marketplace in terms of job growth and GDP growth and productivity in the economy. But after what we heard from Luke and from Minister Sohn and from Anthony Whalen, I'm not going to do that because you've heard all those compelling statistics, and moreover, I think by your very presence here, I'd kind of be preaching to the choir. I think what brings us all here today is a sense that we need now more than ever before to find a way to create more productivity and growth from the technology tools that we have. I want to talk a little bit then about how we confront that challenge and what needs to be done, building a little bit on what Luke was saying. I've spent most of my career in the private sector as an investor in ICT technologies, and I'm now on my second tour in government as a policymaker, first in telecom policy, now as U.S. ambassador to the EU. And I tend to look at the challenge of the digital marketplace in sort of two buckets. On the one side, you have the infrastructure piece. That is, how are you going to get the networks built? How are you going to get them built so that they are ubiquitous, so that everybody in the society has access to them at affordable rates? So that's one piece of the equation. The other piece of the equation are what I refer to as the legal challenges. That is, assuming you can get the networks built, what are the impediments to making sure that data flows ubiquitously over those networks so that people can use them in ways that make sense to them, so that you get the right balance between what consumers want and what investors need. And in that bucket of legal challenges, you have a lot of the issues that were talked about earlier, privacy, security, intellectual property, copyrights, patents, that bundle of issues. And I want to talk about each of these buckets in turn. Now, on the infrastructure side, I believe that the infrastructure challenge to the single digital marketplace is increasingly a wireless challenge. It's increasingly a wireless challenge because so much of data use is moving from the wireline world to the wireless world. In the United States, a statistic that really struck me, over the Christmas holiday of 2011, the number of iPads in the United States doubled in just that holiday season. And when you look at the way people are using computing technology today, much of it is moving into the wireless space, and it's consuming much more bandwidth. The average smartphone, the iPhone, a high-end BlackBerry, consumes 24 times the amount of bandwidth than the kind of phones we were carrying around 5 years ago, a traditional feature phone. And a tablet, such as an iPad, consumes 120 times the bandwidth of a feature phone. So that has led President Obama and other policymakers in the United States to basically ring an alarm in saying that we've got to figure out how to feed this beast, how to move more spectrum into commercial wireless data use. So President Obama has called for a national wireless initiative over the next 5 years. He wants to get wireless broadband available to 98% of the country. The FCC 2 years ago released a very ambitious national broadband plan, which is a very comprehensive approach to trying to get more bandwidth available to American consumers. And just last week, something very interesting happened in the United States. The United States Congress, at the urging of the White House and the FCC, adopted, I think we're the first in the world to do this. We're going to have two-sided auctions. Basically, it is what we call incentive auctions to try to encourage the holders of spectrum to basically turn it back in exchange for money. This is directed primarily at commercial broadcasters that are sitting on an enormous spectrum resource that needs to be repurposed to fuel demand for commercial wireless services. So it's estimated that when these auctions are implemented, broadcasters will voluntarily return spectrum to the United States government. It's expected that that'll raise about $30 billion. And part of that money will actually be used for research in wireless applications. But the important thing is that we're going to move spectrum from one place to another so that it can fuel this demand for commercial wireless spectrum. We're doing a lot of other things in the United States. We're updating our universal service funding system, which is a system that originated in the 1930s to get wireline phone service out to rural areas. Well, it's become a bit of an antiquated system, so that's being updated so it'll subsidize broadband deployment. But the key is that I think in the United States and here in Europe, there needs to be much more focus on fueling the spectrum demand. Because when you think of it, the spectrum is sort of like the oxygen that fuels the digital ecosystem today. You've got to keep repurposing the spectrum resource and managing in a way that meets this demand. And I don't know as much about the European regulatory system as I do the U.S., and certainly not as much as many of you out there, but just my observation from having been here in Europe for a couple of years, I think there has to be a much greater sense of urgency about how you're going to move spectrum into commercial wireless data uses. There was an interesting development about 2 weeks ago in the European Parliament. There was legislation passed to harmonize the frequencies that will be used for commercial wireless data. It's a great start, just harmonizing across Europe the spectrum bands that will be used for this. But then you got to figure out a way to get that spectrum into the hands of the people who want to develop wireless networks. And I think that it seems like there's a long way to go. When I was coming here in the late 90s as FCC chairman, mainly to meet with Jorn and others, I was amazed at Europe's leadership in the wireless area. Through, I think, some very enlightened industrial policy, Europe was able to adopt a pan-European GSM standard. We didn't do that in the United States. We decided to go with multiple standards, so we had this alphabet soup of different wireless standards. We had IDEN and CDMA and GSM. And frankly, a lot of wireless carriers in the United States are still recovering from those decisions. Europe went another way, decided to have a pan-European system. And that, coupled with some incredibly innovative, powerful companies that emerged in Europe in the wireless space like Ericsson and Nokia, Siemens, Europe really led the world. And I worry that if Europe doesn't get a handle on this spectrum management issue, you're going to lose that leadership. And I think it's important to focus on that. I'm glad to see the European Parliament taking it up and the Commission and others. But I think that there needs to be a great sense of urgency. Now, the other bucket, legal challenges. That's privacy, that's cloud computing, intellectual property, some of the things that have been touched on today. The interesting thing about these issues, these challenges, is that Europe and the United States are both grappling with the same issues, basically. We're trying to update our privacy laws to deal with the use of the Internet today, social networking, more interactive uses of technology. It's worrying people. It prompted President Obama about a year ago to issue what he called a Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights, to call for that. That was followed up by a series of papers that were issued by the FTC and by our Commerce Department. And just last week, the White House put out a white paper, which is sort of the blueprint for our approach to online privacy. And it mirrors, in terms of its objectives, exactly what is happening here in Europe. That is, that consumers are worried about putting so much of their private, personal data online, and they're demanding that governments do something about it. So as Anthony Whalen mentioned earlier, the Commission put out its legislative proposal in January. We're looking at that very carefully. We probably have some differences in approach, but ultimately we all want the same thing, and that is for consumers to feel confident when they use these devices that they're not going to suffer. Their personal privacy will be protected, and there are a lot of similarities. One of the things that is, I think, particularly important about the White House paper that was released last week is that global interoperability is a key component of it. I spend a lot of my time in my current job working on data privacy issues. And this is both on the law enforcement side, where we're trying to renegotiate a series of important law enforcement sharing agreements between the United States and Europe, and on the commercial data privacy side, where, as I mentioned, we're both updating our rules and we're trying to work together so that they're interoperable. We're doing the same on cloud computing, which was also mentioned. Cloud computing has been around for a long time. The issues are not particularly new, but the technology has accelerated the urgency of dealing with these issues. They're the liability issues, jurisdictional issues, and privacy issues. Cloud computing has the potential to accelerate all the things we talked about, productivity gains, job gains. Cloud computing has the potential to accelerate that, but if we don't get the legal challenges fixed, it's going to be problematic. And from our perspective in the United States, we're particularly concerned when we see governments, including some people here in Europe, starting to talk about a European cloud or a regional cloud. Because those of you who understand how these networks work, bits don't respect national borders. And if we're going to realize the kind of productivity gains that we're talking about in job growth, we've got to make sure that data can flow seamlessly across borders. And that takes a lot of hard work. In the United States, we are aggressively pushing cloud computing. The administration has required all agencies to evaluate cloud computing before they make IT purchases. So there's a fair amount of activity in that regard. IPR I'm going to touch on very briefly. We, like here in Europe, are in the process of trying to update our patent laws. We are very hopeful that patent reform will be, a unitary patent system will be adopted here in the United States as it has been we hope that it will be adopted under the Danish presidency. I know it's close. I think there were some issues to be worked out about the location of the patent office, but I'll leave that to Ms. Troutman to deal with later. I'm not going to go into all these issues in depth because I saw that you have in-depth working sessions to talk about a lot of these issues, but I just want to leave you with one thought. And that is that as policymakers, we often talk about how we're going to update our laws within particular jurisdictions, because that's how governments think. That's how regulators think. But when you sit down with people in business, they're thinking globally. They're building networks that are going to operate globally and that do operate globally. And I think that sometimes we get hung up, the United States and Europe, we get hung up in our small differences. There's a wonderful book that I would commend to you called The Narcissism of Small Differences by Peter Baldwin. Peter Baldwin basically built on that phrase, the narcissism of small differences, from Freud, and basically it is a psychological tendency that people have to seize on small differences and make them into something much bigger. Well, Peter Baldwin undertook to, through the use of statistics, a lot of them from the OECD, to try to debunk a lot of the conventional wisdom that says that Europe and the United States are so different in so many ways. And in the 2 years and some months that I've been ambassador to the EU, I think about this often because I spend so much of my time trying to find ways that the incredible economic partnership that we have between the United States and Europe can work better. We have an incredible economic relationship, $4 trillion of trade and investment, dwarfs anything else on the planet. But so many times we get hung up on issues that, in the grand scheme of things, are small and insignificant. We talk about data privacy, for example. Now, some people try to make a big deal of our differences and to say that the European approach, which is more regulatory and more top-down as opposed to our approach, is so terribly different and can't be reconciled. But you can't conceive of having these kind of discussions that we have between the United States and Europe on privacy or intellectual property protection or patents with China, for example. And what strikes me is that it's so important for us, as we talk about this single digital market, that we not lose sight of the fact that as Europe talks about its single digital market, and as we try to update our laws to be more efficient in the digital world, we ought to be thinking about a transatlantic digital marketplace. Because if we really want to get the kind of productivity gains that all of us are so hopeful to get, we have to think of that broader economic relationship between the United States and Europe. Because, and I'll stop here, but because in the final analysis, the rest of the world, the Chinese, the Russians, all the BRICS, they're not going to wait for us to work out our small differences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Please come and join us.